Welcome back, Social 20-1. This is lesson 21, and today we're looking at the road to internationalism and supranationalism. Here are our outcomes. Logically, we're going to need to define both terms, and within the current state of the world, see movements towards both of them. You need to establish what are today's shared challenges, explore the founding purpose and record of organizations like the UN, NAFTA, the EU, understand concepts like imposing liberalism, the associated war on terror, and discuss some common ideas like human rights and refugees as it relates to Canada's foreign policies. This is a very ambitious lesson, meaning we will need to divide it into more than one video. Define internationalism. Internationalism is a political principle that advocates greater political or economic cooperation among states and nations. It is associated with other political movements and ideologies, but also reflects a doctrine and belief system. The key here is cooperation among nations. If we jump ahead to supranationalism, this is the state or condition of transcending national boundaries or national interests. The advocacy of the formation of supranational organizations or governments. So here, nationalism is fading away. That, gone is the concept of, this nation and that nation, but now we create something new that we both belong to, and something that is bigger than our sense of individual nationhood. So the key difference between internationalism and supranationalism is to what extent does the pre-existing nation still take priority? And in internationalism, it is still nations working with nations. Yes, they have common issues, common challenges that they have decided that working together is the best approach, but it's still independent nations. Supranationalism, some of that national independence fades away, and now you're subject to a new level of identity. So to some extent, we don't have a great example of supranationalism. But let's hypothesize for a moment of a European Union where all states within the Union have a common currency. All states within the Union have elected members that go to a common parliament. All states within the Union have a common constitution, a common set of laws that they must obey by. They have a common military. They have a common foreign policy where they negotiate collectively. So the idea of this is Luxembourg and that is Croatia, it's fading away, and we are both Europe first. We're European first. We're still Croatian, but that's similar. Like I'm American, but I'm still a Texan, or I'm Canadian and I'm still from Alberta. So EU, not in its current state, but in some state that is foreseeable, an EU where there's common currency, common military, common parliament, common foreign policies, and this idea of more unity could be an example of a supranationalism. At least a step towards that. Within the current state of the world, see movements towards both internationalism and supranationalism. So in order to understand this, there's a variety of issues. We can look at the state of the world from 2014. The world is not falling apart. The trend lines reveal an increasing peaceful coexistence. Now, it's sad looking back from a state of war today, at a time when we thought that we're at a time in history where the world is becoming more peaceful. Arctic sovereignty. So these are all the Arctic countries, Canadians and the Danish, the Americans, the Russians, got the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Icelandic, and the Finns. We all have interests in the Arctic. So to what extent do we coexist? Because the Arctic is a unique, fragile ecosystem. To what extent do we work together to ensure the animal habitat is protected? To work together to best manage and balance our ecological needs with our environmental wants on behalf of those who have no voice, the animals of the Arctic. We also have the difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Another concept related to the road to internationalism, supranationalism. Sometimes we'll have organizations like the UN, which will inject itself into domestic issues. And when they inject themselves into these domestic issues, they may inject themselves as the idea that I'm here to maintain peace that already exists. So that's keep the peace that's already there. Or I'm here to make peace that doesn't exist. So the difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking is central to some of the roles of the UN, is outlined a little bit further here. We can see the difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking with Canada's role in Afghanistan in the first decade of the 21st century, where Canada was at war with the Taliban. As a part of NATO, we sent troops to not keep, but to make peace. Unfortunately, it wasn't 100% successful. Which comes up to a new concept. Was Canada there to make peace? Or do we sometimes, through our foreign policy, try to impose our set of values, our worldview, our ideology? Impose something we value, liberalism. Whoops. Impose liberalism. Are we there to impose democracy and capitalism, the political and economic facets of individualism, of liberalism? And by the idea of imposing it, we can infer that means that it's not welcome, that there's resistance to it. And there's a paradox here. There's some irony, because liberalism at heart is about freedom. So we're forcing freedom. We are, pushing freedom upon people who don't wish to have the Western concept of individual freedom. Nation building. We were in Afghanistan to build a nation. We've done nation building in the past in places like Iraq after the 2003 war there, or in Japan after the end of the 1945 war, World War II. So the dilemma here is, when do we respect the sovereignty, the independence of another country, and say, oh, that's a domestic affair, and when do we intervene? There are some within the United States government that during World War II, before Pearl Harbor, they looked at the wars that were breaking out throughout the world and said, we need to respect the sovereignty of other countries. We're not going to intervene. But under the fog of war, by respecting the sovereignty of other countries, policies like the Holocaust would have no resistance from outside. Without outside resistance, the Holocaust may have eventually been final. The forces of the Nazis were able to exterminate 6 million Jewish people. Those camps were liberated by the Allies. That's what ended the Holocaust. Had we said, no, we need to respect the sovereignty of Germany and the German-occupied territories that were once Germany before, then that gives us an excuse to be active watchers of crimes against humanity. Are we worthy of emulation? Is America a model for the developing world? If you were a leader of a new country, to what extent would you say, let's be like America? Are they worthy of emulation? That's a question to ask yourselves. And therefore, we might ask ourselves, is our foreign policy making us appear to be a country that they should use as a role model, or a country to resist? By America intervening in Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Iran, are we making friends or enemies? Then we can also look at types of internationalism. Hegemonic, revolutionary, and liberal. Here's a quick speech that you can pause my video and watch that, or you can come back to it. It's going to be Ron Paul speaking about the U.S. military as a world policeman. Give you some more insight into these above concepts. The road to internationalism and supranationalism is also a road to responding to some of the challenges of the 21st century, including poverty, the worst form of violence, according to Mohandas K. Gandhi. Poverty, 25,000 people die every day from having not enough. This cartoonist is saying that the G8's not doing enough. Platitudes, conditions, excuses, intellectual assent, these are what the G8 is offering. But what they're not offering is anything beyond hot air. That this sack of hot air is not the change that this individual needs. So this individual is condemned to be one of those 25,000 that is daily dying from having not enough at a time when the G8 has enough to help out. So looking above, you can practice your A1 skills. What's the context? A famine, disparity. What is the solution the cartoonist is advocating? More than hot air. They need actual, food or change. That they need relief, they need food, but they might also need global reform, like fair trade instead of free trade. Perspective, cartoonist is advocating is for more global interaction. The challenge, why might the solution not become reality? It might not become reality because people put national interests, problems within their borders often ahead of problems outside their borders. They might be looking at issues outside their borders and say, we don't have the assets to help everyone. So they might prioritize their own citizens struggling first. We have a video here about the World Health Organization and its response to COVID that you can take a peek at. Watch this and you can see that dilemma between nationalism and internationalism. Here's a related video, a short one on climate change. Take a peek at that. Here's a cartoon looking at global warming. And clearly these individuals are working together, but they're not necessarily working better. That often they're hitting each other with the water, and the water is simply seen as being not enough to deal with the global warming. So these nations working separately are not enough. That this cartoon is saying we need more cooperation, at least internationalism. But even better, probably supranationalism. We need more unity of focus to really respond to the challenges of the 21st century. If we're going to have a 22nd century. Quick review of Canada's 150 years of foreign policy. It's a great little article there for you to look at. We always have practice multiple choice questions to give some insight into, what would this look like in terms of an actual multiple choice question. Questions like this might be generic enough to apply to the outcomes of this course. We have an optional assignment here. Optional assignment. So let's say you didn't want to do the road trip. Let's say that you haven't done much for your notes this year, and you're looking at your classwork mark, and you're like, I'm not gonna do well. Here's an optional assignment. You can look at the Canadian foreign policy, and you can create a Canadian foreign policy, and these are the things you must look at. Do we need to respect the sovereignty of other nations? How do we respond with military might or others if there's a direct invasion or sponsoring an internal element? You might look at, do we respond with economic power or aid when others are struggling? So there's a whole bunch of hypothetical questions for you to look at that might help you out with the assignment. Here's some more practice, multiple choice. We also need you to take note of what some key organizations in the world are. So we want you to know UNESCO and the WTO, the IMF, the EU. Most of these are straight out of Social 10. You can definitely click on these links and review if need be. We also want you to look at some of the common language that we're talking about. What is international law? What is the purpose of the ICC? These can be answered through these two links as well. Gitmo, the torture location in Cuba by the Americans. So anything in green, we're asking you to go back and do a little bit more. In the 1990s, there was a ethnic cleansing campaign by the Serbs, and the leader of the Serbs was Slobodan Milosevic, and he's shown here as, you know, a very Neanderthal, barbaric-like individual. See if you can see an ideological perspective here. These are other genocides that have happened in recent history. There's a great cartoon about the narrowness of nationalism and how nationalism isn't enough to respond to the challenges of the 21st century. So that's the intro to this lesson. Second part of the lesson really focuses on the UN. And things you need to know about the mini unit on the UN are here. And we'll create a second video on the UN.